We are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Network here at the Go Local Live Broadcast Center. We're going to get right to it. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and of course the mothership at CoalitionRadio.us. It is my great honor to have joining us with us right now Kim Ruff. She is a candidate for the presidency of the United States on the Libertarian ticket. She has been on the show a number of times, but wanted to come on tonight to serve as sort of a, kind of a coda, a wrap-up, if you will, to the kind of conversations that we as a party have been having, as Kristen just mentioned, for, close to 40 years, that we encapsulated and put permanently into our platform as a plank just a couple of years ago, thanks to the good work of Sarah Daggers and her crew. But why this is such a critically important issue, not on a first level, just because of the issue, but because of what this represents, if you will, to freedom, to self-ownership, to control over one's body, all the issues that libertarians represent. I always like to say we represent the ultimate party of choice. We believe in choice for everything. Kim, welcome to the show tonight.
Hi, Pat. Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
So what are your thoughts? If you are running for the presidency of the United States, how does this issue speak to you and to the larger issue of freedom?
There's two aspects of it that are hugely important and I want to focus on. One of them is the fact that at the very core of libertarian philosophy is the belief that you own yourself. Your body, your property, the fruits of your labor, that belongs to you, and no one has a right to infringe on that. So a natural progression of that concept is the recognition that sex workers have the right to do with their body what they choose to do. And if they do it for economic gain, bully for them. If they choose to do it for something else, that's a prerogative. It's their body, their choice. So bodily autonomy, property rights, that is sacrosanct in our view as libertarians, and that's absolutely why we're advocates for sex workers. The second aspect of it comes to the whole fact that if you're not willing to stand up for the rights of any of your fellow man, whether or not you agree with what they do with their life, then who's going to stand up for yours when they're violated? So it's incredibly important that we recognize that sex workers are penalized and a marginalized group in our society, and stop using our moralistic views to permit them to be abused by government. We have to stand up for them just as we hope that they will stand up for us when our rights are violated, and so on and so forth. So that's the two aspects that are hugely important and need to be addressed.
The government has essentially weaponized a prior guest referred to it as the sexual worker government industrial complex. They've weaponized the entire criminal justice system, if I can even dignify it with those terms, to create a pipeline to prison and then a permanent marginalization that I haven't seen, since the war on drugs. Do you find similarities between the two wars on, if you will?
Yeah, absolutely. This is something that we as libertarians would consider a victimless crime, in the sense that even though it's on the books and it's not legal, it shouldn't be a law, because the crime creates no victim. Nobody is stolen from, nobody is abused, nobody's enslaved, nobody's murdered if somebody chooses to engage in sex work. So to penalize somebody simply for doing something that you may disagree with would be considered a victimless crime. And anytime we cage people or we financially penalize or curtail the rights of individuals just because they engage in behaviors we disagree with, that's a victimless crime and something that we wholly reject. So yes, just like the war on drugs does that for people who produce, distribute, and possess narcotics, the same thing is what's going on with sex workers. They should not be in prison. They should never be serving time for anything that they engage in unless they actually harm somebody. And sex work in and of itself never harms anyone.
Our government has created a dependency society, and what it does so cruelly to folks convicted, if you will, of sex crimes and sex worker crimes particularly, again, that are not consensual, that are not a violation or an aggression of anyone's individual rights, is to essentially wrest away that dependency society from them after having effectively marginalized, actually have effectively crippled their lives and their prospects by doing so. What are the motivations of government in a situation like this? The more the government seemingly acts on this with the passage of legislation like FOSTA and SESTA, the more dangerous circumstances we place these men and women in, the more challenging their lives are in terms of the judicial system and their financial prospects. What could possibly be the motivation here?
That's a good question. I don't actually know what the impetus is behind it, unless it's just this moralistic or puritanical vestige of our culture that we're trying to dictate what other people do with their lives. But there may be somebody who has something to gain from them being penalized. Maybe they find it's so funny too, because if you actually look at the private behaviors of so many people in positions of authority or power, they patronize sex workers, but then turn around and penalize them in their decision making or their legislation. So I don't know exactly what the prime mover is there for them, but there's no actual reasonable, ethical, or moral logic behind what they're doing.
If you could, speak to the type of resources that, much like the war on drugs, that we've invested in terms of, again, eradicating a victimless crime, for which there seems to be, by the way, untouchable, undeniable, incredible demand for. Is there never an end to the hypocrisy of this?
Yeah, absolutely. At the core, it is hypocritical. And on top of that, I mean, coming from the perspective of being a project manager, operations director, I always look at things in terms of time that's invested. So you think about all the people that we're paying to make the legislation, all the people who are responsible for interpreting it, all the people that are paid to enforce it, the sting operations that they set up. It's a huge amount of capital just wasted in the initial front end. And then when somebody actually goes through the criminal justice system, they're put in prison, they're fed, they're watered, they're monitored, they have guards. All of that costs a huge amount of money. And for what purpose? To tell somebody who does with their body what they will that they aren't right? It's hugely costly, and it's totally unethical.
I'm going to ask you an incredibly open-ended question. One of your opponents, Senator Elizabeth Warren, has voted in support of FOSTA and SESTA and has supported legislation that effectively conflates, if you will, trafficking with consensual sex work. There's a very real chance that we hope that you'll actually might be on a debate stage with her at some point in the future. At one point she was a favorite, now middle of the pack, who knows. But if you had an opportunity on a debate stage, what is the message that you would give to an Elizabeth Warren who, despite someone who claims to be empathetic to the cause of women and speaks with such great certainty towards body autonomy when it comes to choice, when it comes to reproductive rights, what would you say to her given the opportunity?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that when has prohibition of any kind ever functioned properly? When has it ever actually served to address the issue you're trying to address? In the case of sex workers, when you're penalizing consenting adults for engaging in consensual acts, what you're effectively doing is creating a black market system, which makes it harder for them to vet their clientele, makes it harder for them to have a network that's safe for them, and drives them further underground and puts them at extraordinary risk, notwithstanding the fact that they're being effectively hunted by the police state. So if your goal is to try and reduce harm, why would you enact legislation that only proposes to create greater harm? That's not logical. That's not helpful. You're not doing anyone any favors when you do that. It doesn't address sex trafficking. All you're doing is punishing consenting adults.
You know, it speaks to the liberal ideology on so many levels that, as I spoke with an earlier guest, that in order to save the village, we have to effectively burn it.
Right.
Do you feel like this issue is a microcosm of the entire, and really an indictment, if you will, of the entire American criminal justice system?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is absolutely why we as libertarians are big proponents of making sure everyone has the information about jury nullification. The fact that you as a juror have at your disposal the opportunity to say, this person may be guilty of breaking this law, but this law in and of itself never should have been on the books. Therefore, I find them not guilty. We have a situation where legislators are putting together laws, and just because it is illegal doesn't mean that it is something that is wrong. So that's what we really need to weigh as a society. We need to be able to and I think this is where we come from as libertarians anyway, is that you should be your own moral compass. You should make the decision or the determination about what's permissible or acceptable. There's a couple of major no's, like obviously don't murder, don't enslave, and don't steal from others. But above and beyond that, it's up to individual choice. And we should have that full menu at our disposal instead of having a small group of bureaucrats make that decision for us and then punishing us because we didn't adhere to these unethical laws.
As it's currently constructed, the American criminal justice system, and I'm looking at it from the global perspective, starting at the highest levels, our court system, through the Department of Justice, through the seemingly endless alphabet soup of criminal agencies, the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, all one have to do is go to a notorious case we discussed a few weeks ago, a young man named Ross Ulbricht, to understand that they can all very easily work in concert, I should say. But the prevailing theme is money. You've got a system which essentially rewards incarceration. It's outcome-based at an extreme that I don't think we've seen in American history before. And when I say that, we're not overtly writing a check to people who incarcerate a young man or woman or someone who's trans, but we may as well if in fact our federal funding, to which we must all pay homage to every day, because so much has been taken away from the states, and you've got these unfunded mandates, and then you've got the if you will, the carrot of federal funding standing over criminal justice agencies, large and small, from the smallest municipal police department on to the FBI. So when you've got a situation that's constructed where you essentially reward people with additional salaries, additional resources, and this grotesque militarization, in order to translate into these conflated, created crises, the war on, fill in the blanks, it's become a standing headline, and the czar who's in charge of that perspective, war on. How does a libertarian propose to deconstruct that so we understand that a criminal justice system is to prevent property rights and physical harm to the individual only, should not be predictive in nature, should not make, as you point out so aptly, these great moral judgments? How do we deconstruct that as a libertarian?
Well, I think a lot of that requires almost a re-education in a way of society, because the original Jeffersonian model of jurisprudence was built on the same concepts that came out of the Magna Carta and the rights of Englishmen. The idea that prosecutors exist, the prosecutors for the state or the federal government exist to seek the truth, not necessarily conviction. And you have both mens and actus rea, which is you have to have an intention to break a law, which if you have 27 yards back to back of law, how do you know that how could you actually intend to break it necessarily? And then of course the act, and then evidence to prove that you did indeed do it, which is beyond a reasonable doubt. There are supposed to be these certain fail-safes, but because we reward prosecutors for convictions and not for finding the truth, and because we have this criminal justice to prison pipeline that we've created, and because we reward people for arresting or getting that quota, we've basically made it profitable for everyone tangentially involved with it to be engaged in it. So we have to teach people that this is the purpose of the criminal justice system. This is what it was designed for. And then we need to start chipping away at all those laws. And that means pushing on legislators at the local, state, and federal level and making sure that they start repealing those laws that presume to penalize people for doing things that harm no one.
Wow. Kim, we only have a minute or two left. How can folks find out more about your campaign? And do you have any plans to travel soon to near and far to any of the vast outreaches, if you will, of the libertarian world, the planet libertarian?
Oh my goodness. Yes, in January I have, we've got upcoming on the 11th of January is going to be the Tennessee Libertarian Party Convention. I'm looking forward to that. After that, on the following weekend, I believe the 17th, 18th, and 19th is going to be the Georgia Libertarian Convention. Then after that is going to be the Arizona Libertarian Party Convention the weekend of the 25th. So those are my January events. And then if you want to find out more about us, keep track of what we're up to, or donate to my campaign, you can do it at ruffphillips2020.com.
Outstanding. I want to just say a special note to Kristen Calhoun, who we had some technical issues joining us. We're going to get her on when we resume programming right after the new year, because I believe that the decrim movement and the Libertarian Decrimming Caucus has got an important role to play at our national convention in Austin, Texas, just a short 5 months or so away. First of all, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. I'm sure we'll speak before the new year. But again, thank you so much for joining us. And I think it's an uplifting message that you deliver, and a real coda onto tonight's, what is really a solemn observation of years of uninterrupted tragedy. I appreciate you sort of giving us that bright outlook for the future, and I wish you nothing but well and peace on your campaign trail.
Thank you so much, Pat, and thank you so much for dedicating time to this. I wish more people would discuss these issues, so I appreciate you highlighting it in your show.
All right, God bless. She is Kim Ruff. She is a candidate for the presidency of these United States. You can find her on ruffphillips2020.com. I hope I got that right. Where there are, as is our want in the libertarian movement, substantial, detailed analysis of issues. Because the great thing about libertarians is, and she just was proof positive of that, you ask them a question, we're going to answer. And we're going to answer directly and bluntly, all through the perspective of personal liberty. Folks, this brings to sort of a conclusion, if you will, of tonight's conversation. I want to thank all of you for joining us. This will be available in podcasts hopefully soon. It will be available up on our Facebook page as well as our YouTube page, all of which can be found at coalitionradio.us. We are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Media Network. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at coalitionradio.us, and of course, the mothership, our website. Have a wonderful holiday week. We'll be off next Friday, but we'll rejoin you in the new year with, again, conversation about issues and challenges facing us as a society, as a body politic, that you probably won't find anywhere else. God bless all of you, and we'll see you soon.